Christopher. How are you? Good to see you.
Doing good, Charles. How are you, man?
Good, good. Thanks for coming out. So
Thanks.
you've been driving around the canyons, I understand.
Well, I went for a hike over the weekend up in Malibu with the Mutts, and in light of the fire up in Topanga last week, I think it was on Tuesday, which we don't have a whole lot of detail, but based on what we were able to tell from the news footage and some of the Forestry Service cameras, is it started behind. It looks like a permanent dwelling, but it's a trailer in this very sort of remote area behind that dwelling. Certainly raises questions. But that aside, after my hike, I just took a little time and kind of drove up along some of those really more remote areas. And it's funny, people think Malibu, the rich and the famous, and it certainly is, but there's also a lot of really wild country up there, as we learned through, the fire a few years ago. And as I was on Latigo Canyon Road, which really climbs way up into the mountains, kind of a little bit north of Pepperdine, there were two or three encampments right there on the road, people in cars, minivans, who had set up, and I'm telling you what Charles, we're familiar enough with the dynamics of this population now that somebody stopping to have a sandwich from somebody who's dug in. And they were set up, a couple of them had their generators. And if you have that picture that I sent to, and the irony of this picture is, Charles, you can see up on the hillside, some of those trees, they're still blackened and charred from the Thomas fire 3 years ago, or 2018, which was, of course, the largest fire in Southern California history. And it burned simultaneously with the Camp Fire up in Paradise. And I didn't realize this. I was digging into it a few weeks ago for a story I was working on. Those two fires, Charles, started within 24 hours of each other. The two largest wildfires in recorded California history burned simultaneously. And it was a harbinger of things to come because resources were so stretched. We sent folks up to Paradise to help with that fire, which stretched our folks down here thin. So to then, in light of all of that, see people back up there camping out, who knows, what sorts of activities. I mean, we're one cigarette.
So all these forces coming together like this, do the canyons that that are a little more in CD11, the Temescal or coming off of where the Village Highlands is, or up in whatever in the mountains there, are those canyons at the same kind of risk because they conceivably have the same kind of guys camping out?
Absolutely. And, even more risk because the population, you're talking like Palisades, Highlands, places like that is obviously denser. And we haven't had a fire in that area. The one sort of benefit up north of CD11 is that we had the fire. So the next one won't be, as bad, which, by the way, is the way nature intends it. Amongst many other issues we can get into down the road is how we've sort of made a mess of the natural order of things when it comes to fire. But back to the Palisades and CD11, I mean, the fact that we know and we have firsthand accounts from neighbors, we have the LAPD surveillance video from the fire in the Palisades Highlands, which was intentionally started by a homeless individual who was known to the community. I believe he had been arrested a couple of times before. I'm not entirely sure, but he was known to the community and intentionally set fires. And there are many people living up there. There was a fire on PCH in the Palisades Bluffs. I think that was about a month ago. That was started by an illegal encampment. And you saw for a week or so after, LAFD was up there doing patrols. But again,
this all goes also down through the Santa Monica Mountains. I mean, are we talking the same all the way to the Sepulveda Pass? Really, in the nature of where they're canyons, where they're...
Well, I mean, all we have to do is follow the fires that have already happened, right, Charles? I mean, we've had actually two in Sepulveda Pass. We both know, started by homeless encampments. We've had, two in the Palisades just in the last year. So the evidence is everywhere. I've spoken to, or if anyone were to just go into your local, fire station, the firefighters will tell you that they are putting out multiple homeless fires per day. I talked to a crew in CD11. I don't want to identify him, but it was CD11. This was just a few months ago. And I, just wandered into the station because I had a cup of coffee in a few minutes. And I said, just curious, guys, how many calls have you had today? And they said 8. How many of those, or I asked them how many fire calls. They said 8. Oh, on a single Sunday, that seems like a lot. How many were homeless related? I said, all of them. And this was 5 p.m. on a Sunday during COVID when the rest of us were at home. 8 homeless fires in a day. So we are quite literally playing Russian roulette with CD11. And every encampment, every little area of homelessness has its own dynamics, its own social structures, its own hierarchies. I mean, if you talk to folks, for example, at Rose, they know which camp to go to get which drugs, to get which services, to get your bike fixed, what have you. So there's almost like this civilization evolving right before our very eyes. And unfortunately, it's built upon the backs of societies, normal societies, most vulnerable. And that's how what we've come to call the homeless industrial complex, which is enabled by, certain elected officials, sustains itself. So what happened at the boardwalk was almost inevitable. When you let something progress that far, when you have that concentration, and I would wager that it's almost historically unprecedented. It's like we're conducting some, horrific social experiment on these people. I mean, think of another time in history when, particularly in a, otherwise theoretically advanced society, we allowed this congregation of mental illness, physical illness, abuse, crime, addiction. I mean, just go down the list of ways to destroy a human being and then concentrate it like dark matter on a beach where everybody has every incentive to stay and to continue coming. And then we're surprised at the results. And this, alleged cleanup over the last few weeks, we interviewed some of the folks who just simply picked up and moved to Westchester Park. I've spoken to some folks here in Santa Monica who just moved, and they're more than happy to move back when the crowd moves on. So unless and until we start treating it like an actual humanitarian crisis, we're just going to keep playing whack-a-mole, and lots of people are going to keep dying.
Just want to thank you, Chris, for coming back and seeing us. And we'll see you again real soon.
Appreciate it, Charles. Take care.